Hi, grade 12s. We're going to start with hormones and homeostasis today. I've divided the lesson into 3 different days. Okay, and what I'm going to do is go through the basics of hormones, give you a background on them, and start with the pituitary gland in this lesson. So, endocrine glands are ductless glands. Okay, so we're looking at the endocrine system. These guys are ductless, so they don't have ducts. So what that means is that they don't have a straw feeding the products of themselves into the circulatory system. So in other words, you've just got a gland and it's going to secrete, as opposed to the liver, for instance, that has the bile duct coming out of it. Okay, so there's the common bile duct coming out of the liver. A duct is like a straw, so bile goes through a nice tight little tube, and then it enters the rest of the digestive system. So these guys they don't have that. They just make a product, and it just what's what I'm looking for, diffuses out of them. Okay, so it goes right into the circulatory system. All right. And what is it? It is a hormone. So a hormone is a chemical messenger sent to many parts of the body to produce a specific effect on a target cell or organ. So here's where I'm going to take a little pause and show you this diagram. If this is a cell that's secreting the hormone, so we could say this is the thyroid gland cell. Okay, so this is a cell in the thyroid gland. You are a target cell or you are a non-target cell. So in other words, if you're wondering, okay, is thyroid hormone going to affect every single cell in my body? No, it is not. Okay, it's only going to affect the cells with the receptor. So they're showing this receptor right here. It looks like an M. Okay, it doesn't have to look like an M. So if you have a receptor for the hormone, then you are going to receive the target hormone. Okay, so you're going to receive the hormone, and then you know how receptors work. If you're not a target cell, so if you're not a cell that's supposed to receive the hormone, you won't have any receptors. And so then the hormone can affect you. So target cells have receptors on them. All right? And it's like a lock and key, just like with enzymes. So we got through that, and now you should understand this. So if you have a receptor, you're going to receive the hormone. And again, it works like it says that receptors acts as a key, and it fits into a lock. Most body cells are constantly exposed to a variety of hormones. Only target cells will respond to a specific hormone, okay? So only if you have that receptor will you respond to that hormone, and that makes you a target cell. All right, something interesting, if hormones are not used, they are recycled. So hormones that are not picked up are cleared up from the body at a steady rate by enzymatic breakdown. So we've got enzymes to destroy hormones that are not being used and are not being received by their target cells. Okay, so you're not going to be overrun by hormones all the time. Even if it's adrenaline, for instance, that'll eventually get picked up. So the endocrine system regulates and coordinates the functions of organs throughout the body. The endocrine system is responsible for controlling all kinds of things. You can read through that as well as I can. We're going to get through all of these, so I'm not going to highlight them because they're going to be highlighted in other places. So what do I want you to know from this paragraph? The nervous system and the endocrine system work together, but they have really different strategies. The nervous system sends out rapid signals along nerves, okay? So when we get to the nervous system, we're going to do endocrine first, and then we'll get into the nervous system. The nervous system likes to send you messages from your brain very super quickly, and you respond really, really quickly. The endocrine system has a very different strategy. It sends out hormones. Hormones are slower, okay, but they're longer lasting responses. So when you send out something from the endocrine system, from an endocrine gland, it has to travel quite a way. So unfortunately, the target receptors, the target cells are not always going to be in close proximity to the gland that's sending them out. So it's a much slower journey, and then you've got a longer lasting response as a result, okay? So very different strategies, but keep in mind the endocrine system and the nervous system work together hand in hand to create homeostasis in our bodies. All right. So endocrine gland, again, I've already highlighted that for you. Just something to mention, an exocrine gland is the opposite. So whereas this is secreting organs directly into the blood, this has a series of secretions that are going outside of the body, okay? So if you ever study the exocrine glands, these guys are glands that are secreting outside of the body. If you took healthcare, you might have touched on these. So 2 examples are sweat, and salivary glands. You're not purposely trying to secrete saliva outside of your body, but inevitably that's what's going to happen sometimes. And sweat obviously is designed to leave the body. Up here is a picture here of all the different endocrine glands. So I'm going to go through them with you. I think on here, yeah, they look pretty good because the other diagram I have is not as clear. And I've asked you guys to label the endocrine system diagram. So actually, no, you know what? Changing my mind and not redoing the video as a result, I'm going to move forward. So because in this instance, you can see the pituitary gland, but we're missing a couple of glands. Okay, so I will use the other diagram when we get to this. All right, hormones, next step. So I've already said to you, you have different cells that are target cells and different cells that are non-target. In addition to that, you have target hormones and non-target hormones. So non-target hormones affect many cells throughout the body. Okay, so in other words, this kind of hormone is going to be felt by almost every cell in your body. All right, one instance of that, or two instances here, are insulin and adrenaline. Okay, so insulin is necessary because it regulates your blood sugar levels, and adrenaline wakes you up and gets everything going. And human growth hormone is another one. Cells have to grow, tissues have to grow. So these guys here are non-target hormones. In other words, many cells are going to be affected by them. All right. Target hormones have specific cells that they'll work on. All right. And so we'll get a little bit more into hormones, and then we'll start to look at specific hormones. One of the last things you need to know about hormones is that there are two main types as well. So another division of hormones. All right. We have steroid and we have protein. So now if you recall, we go way back to February and we talk about the fact that some steroids are hormones. Okay, so I gave you that example with testosterone. And I said, just know that steroids have a 4-ring structure. Maybe that's bringing it back for you. But now it's the time when we're actually going to look at these guys and what their effects are. So if you're a steroid hormone, that means you are lipid soluble, because remember, steroids are lipids. Okay, so important point there. Steroids are lipids. So lipids, okay? They're derived from cholesterol. That's why they have a really similar structure to cholesterol. And if you're a lipid, you're not water soluble. You are lipid soluble. You're soluble in fat. Our examples are estrogen and testosterone and cortisol. Those are some examples of lipid soluble hormones. Now, what's the difference here? Why am I emphasizing this? Because these guys will actually be allowed to go inside of the cell. Okay, why? Because they're lipids, so they can pass through the phospholipid bilayer. All right. Protein hormones are water soluble. So hopefully that's a red flag for you going now, okay, so if they're water soluble, they can't easily pass through that phospholipid bilayer. So it goes on and it tells you about what kind of amino acids are used here. We're not going to worry about that too much. What I do want you to know again is they are soluble in water, so they are hydrophilic. And here are some examples: insulin and growth hormone. Okay, and you know that your cells have to receive growth hormone. So how do they get in? This is where things become more interesting. They're not going to go through a channel. Okay, so that's not, that you might be thinking that would have been an awesome answer, but that's not how they actually get in. So what they do is they attach to a receptor on your cells. Okay, so there's a hormone receptor for these guys that are water-soluble hormones. And what they do is they make this chemical called cyclic AMP. So yes, that is adenosine monophosphate. So you know how we have ATP, adenosine triphosphate. This is a version of that. So at this point, you need to know that it is a cyclic version of adenosine monophosphate. And AMP, cyclic AMP, serves a huge role in allowing your hormones to enter, to allow the responses to enter a cell. So these guys create cyclic AMP, and there it is, adenosine monophosphate. And CAMP is a messenger that turns on enzymes in the cytoplasm to carry out the functions. So in other words, the hormone makes this, and this turns on the reaction. Okay, so that's how your water-soluble hormones work. All right, features that define how hormones work. I'll go through this with you. Only the cells that contain surface or internal receptors for the hormones respond to the hormones. So we've already gone through that. Once bound to the receptors, hormones produce a response by turning on cellular processes or turning them off. Okay, so keep that in mind. Cellular processes can be turned on or off, and we'll get to some really specific examples over the next 3 lessons. Hormones are effective in very small concentrations. You don't need a whole lot of them, okay, because of the amplification that occurs in both the surface and the internal receptor mechanisms. So in other words, hormones are received, and then there's going to be a response, and the response is amplified. You don't need a high concentration of this. And the response to a hormone differs among target organs. So in other words, again, a target organ means that the organ can receive the hormone and respond to it. So different organs are going to respond to different hormones at different amplifications, and it's different among species. So our growth hormone might not be effective on other animals, and that's a might, because we know that some growth hormones are certainly going to affect us as well, okay, from different species. So in many cases, they're species specific, but not in every case. All right, let's look at this diagram of the endocrine system. Okay, it's a little blurry, but it works because we've got everything on here. So in your brain, you actually have, and attached to your brain, you have 3 endocrine glands. So one of them is the pineal gland. We'll get to that in the next lesson or so. The pineal gland is in that region of the brain. Okay, the hypothalamus, and I've got a much better diagram of it as we go through this, is in this area, and the pituitary gland is the one that's hanging down. Okay, so keep that in mind. It'll go pineal gland, hypothalamus, pituitary gland. And then we have the thyroid gland in the neck region. Okay, so here's your thyroid gland. And this is why I hesitated with the other diagram. It's because you couldn't really see the bumps on it. So this is the thyroid gland. On the thyroid gland, you're going to have what many people will describe to you as like little blisters. You're going to have usually 4 little blisters on that thyroid gland, okay? And I'm just looking for a color that'll stand out here. So I've got my purple and purple pen, and then on there you can draw in, and you don't have to have a different color, but I'm drawing them in for you. You will have usually, I'm saying usually, you'll have 4 parathyroid glands. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Some people only have 2. They function just as well as somebody who has 4, but like little blisters popping up there, okay? The thymus gland is in the chest region, and at this point, many of you guys are going to be losing your thymus gland, okay? So I'll talk to you about that as we go through it, but it does kind of dry up and disappear after your adolescence. On the kidneys, kidney 1, kidney 2, on the kidneys, we have the adrenal gland, okay? So we've got an adrenal gland here and an adrenal gland here. And then the pancreas is definitely an organ of digestion, but it secretes hormones, and so therefore we count it as part of the endocrine system. And then depending on if you're male or female, you're going to have ovaries, okay? The ovaries produce the hormones for a female, and then the testes produce the hormones for the male, all right? And then over here we've got a table that shows you the endocrine system. This is a really good summary table. I just like to include it. I'm not going to teach it because I'm going to go through everything in here in detail, great detail. But as a quick refresher, and if you were really studying for a test where you didn't have everything open, you would probably go back to this and refer to this and test yourself. Okay, did I know this or did I not know this? Okay, so it's a good thing to have with you. All right, I'm going to go through the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. This will be one of the longer lessons that I have for you, and that's why I've divided everything into 3 days, knowing that these guys are going to be long lessons, okay? And it would be long if you were sitting in class, obviously, too. So the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland, okay. Now, this is where you need to know the difference and where they're located. This here is your thalamus in your brain, okay? So that's the thalamus. Underneath the thalamus, hypo underneath, less than, is your hypothalamus, okay? So when I'm referring to the hypothalamus, I'm referring to this area here. All right? And then hanging off of that, this is where your pituitary gland is. Okay, so that's the pituitary. And then when we get to it, because we're going to talk about the pineal gland also, the pineal gland is here. And so this is a really good diagram that shows you the difference. So we've got pineal gland, hypothalamus, and pituitary gland. All right, and the hypothalamus is part of the brain. So when we study the nervous system and we study the brain, we're going to be talking about the hypothalamus again. So the hypothalamus is indeed part of the brain. Okay, it processes information about the body's internal functions. That's important. Okay, it's a real processing center, and it sends out commands involved in regulating your body functions. Okay, super, super important. And where are the commands sent to? They're sent to the pituitary gland. Okay, so in other words, this is in communication with this. The hypothalamus is controlled by other parts of the nervous system and the brain. Okay, so this here is getting all kinds of information from the brain. And then it gathers that information up and it sends commands to the pituitary gland. So this endocrine gland is part of the brain. So be aware of that. The hypothalamus is clearly in the brain. It's part of the brain and it functions in other things other than just sending out hormones. All right, it produces neurohormones. Well, I'll get to that in a minute. It's important. A neurohormone is slightly different than a hormone. And the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland link the endocrine and the nervous system together. So if you were writing a regular test or a regular exam, if we were writing an exam at all, I would say to you which hormones are which systems are responsible for homeostasis. And the two systems that are most responsible for homeostasis are the nervous system and the endocrine system. And that's why we studied them in grade 12 and we called the unit homeostasis. Okay, endorphins. You've probably heard of endorphins before. They're made by the hypothalamus, and the pituitary gland. Okay, they're released by intermediate lobe of the pituitary gland. We'll get to that. And they act as neurotransmitters. So I'm going to spend at least one lesson on neurotransmitters. We are going to come back to this when we are done with the nervous system. So neurotransmitters control pain, okay? And they are natural painkillers. We'll talk about a few of them in this unit or in this note. So neurohormones are a special type of hormone that is produced by a neuron. So what is a neuron? A neuron is a nerve cell. You're going to become very familiar with them when we get to the nervous system. So a neuron is a specific type of cell that's a nerve cell, and these guys are producing neurohormones. All right, so different than the endocrine gland. Now let's look at the first of the endocrine glands, called the pituitary. We're not at the first because I looked at the hypothalamus with you, but this is the master gland, is what I want to tell you. Okay, so this guy is the one that is in charge of so many other glands or so many other hormones. 1 centimeter in diameter, I'm not going to ask you about that. It's located within the cranium, just below the brain. So again, it's right here, hanging off, okay? It's referred to as the master gland because it produces so many hormones that control almost everything else in your body, okay? So it controls most of the other endocrine glands. There are 2 lobes, all right? So you've got the anterior pituitary gland and the posterior pituitary gland. The posterior pituitary gland is considered part of the nervous system, okay? And what's important is it does not produce any hormones. All right, moving on to the next page. Just give me 1 second to catch up here. Okay, right here. So this gland stores and releases hormones produced by the hypothalamus. All right. 2 important hormones from the posterior lobe are ADH and oxytocin. We're going to look at feedback loops. You already did look at a feedback loop. That's yet to come. No, you did already, with oxytocin. So 2 important hormones from the posterior pituitary gland are ADH and oxytocin. These 2 hormones, ADH and oxytocin, are formed in the hypothalamus and transported via nerve axons to the posterior pituitary. So in other words, they're made in one place and they're stored in another. Okay, so what do you want to know about this? This area stores hormones, okay? And so I just want to refer you to this here. So we've got the posterior pituitary over here, and we have the anterior pituitary in the front. Posterior means toward the back, anterior means toward the front, okay? And so if you're looking at that, and then you have, I'm just looking for that other diagram that I gave you, and you're looking at this, they're going to be conflicting, okay? So in other words, this one here is showing you the back of the brain. And so this would be the front of the face. So the face would be over here. You'd have your eyes over here. Okay? And so this would be posterior and that's anterior. Okay? So when you look at any Google images of the pituitary gland, they usually have the face of the person over here. Okay? And so that's why this is the posterior. It looks like it's exactly the opposite of the other diagram I gave you. And that's the anterior. So this is the front. This is our face. This is the back of our head. All right. So the anterior lobe is very, very busy. So the hypothalamus produces releasing hormones and releasing inhibiting hormones, okay, which travel to the anterior pituitary to stimulate or inhibit the production and secretion of a hormone. So what does that mean? If you've got a releasing hormone, it controls whether other hormones are going to be released or whether they're going to be inhibited. All right, so these guys, releasing hormones, control what other hormones are doing in the body. All right, so if you don't need a lot of a hormone, it's going to say stop, and that's going to inhibit the production of that particular hormone. So it synthesizes and it secretes the hormone. All right, and so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take you through the different hormones of the anterior pituitary, and there are quite a few of them, and you can see them summarized in this diagram here. Okay, so always look at diagrams to help you out, because they are excellent means of summarizing everything that I'm showing you. All right, the growth hormone. Growth hormone is the first hormone that I'm going to look at with your anterior pituitary gland. So what does it do? It stimulates cell division. You probably could have guessed that. So growth hormone stimulates cell division. So when is growth hormone going to be super active? When you're very young, okay, and going through adolescence. So it stimulates cell division. It stimulates protein synthesis. Why? Because you have to create proteins to create muscle tissue and create all kinds of different types of tissue. So it also stimulates bone growth. You would have guessed that probably in children and adolescents. Okay, so you have got lots and lots of growth hormone being made when you're young. Deficiencies in GH, and it can also be called HGH if we're talking about human growth hormone, during childhood produce dwarfs. Okay, so they're called pituitary dwarfs. So pituitary dwarfs didn't get enough GH or HGH when they were young, and so they didn't grow to their full potential. Overproduction of HGH or GH during childhood can make something that we call a pituitary giant. Okay, so just some differences there. Most people are in the average range, and they grow to somewhere near the average height. Okay, here's a summary table of all of our pituitary hormones. So the anterior lobe, you can see, is extremely productive, producing all of these, okay? And then the posterior is more a place of storage, all right? And we'll talk about those two there. What I'm going to do now is stop this so that you can take a break, and you can start the next video when you're ready.